let's get into some details about what BIP-110 does. It's fun. It's incredibly well thought out. And in my effort to try and extend olive branches, I always undermine it and speak less favorably about it than I really should. Because I guess on some level I know no one will really trust my impartiality on it unless I can show that kind of remove from it. But it really is a fantastic upgrade. And I'll explain why, because I think a lot of the nuance with the Taproot stuff is lost. Let's talk about Taproot, because Taproot was meant to scale Bitcoin, and it's genius in its design and what it allows for. So with, supposing you're just spending a SegWit output, all you have is, the ECDSA signature, and then you have the pub key, and that's it. Taproot's way more complex than that, and it uses less data to do what it needs to do thanks to Schnorr SIGs. I believe that's the reason, but it's a little bit smaller, so you have an economic incentive to use it, but you're doing the same amount of stuff using less data. And that's the essence of scaling Bitcoin. You're only going to scale Bitcoin in two ways. One is do more with the same amount of resources, or use fewer resources to do the same amount of stuff. Now remember that, because that's kind of, am I talking about efficiency or scaling? Well, they overlap, and there's not a clear definition between the two. Taproot is supposed to scale Bitcoin. In the majority of cases, the way a Taproot transaction pans out is you create the output, and then when you want to spend that in a new input, you're using the key path. And the key path is similar to what we had prior to Taproot. But you have this thing tacked onto it where you can redeem those funds using the script path. And the script path is attached to the key in this sort of way where we say, well, there are alternative ways you can spend this if you want. And you can create all sorts of complicated redemption scenarios that don't need to be revealed on chain. So multi-sig is the obvious example, and other things like Lightning, for example, where instead of revealing a few different scenarios where you have to hash together and reveal every single possibility, you only reveal the one that you actually ended up using. And that's just genius for scaling and privacy. And that's what makes Taproot such a promising thing for scaling. Because you can come up with these convoluted redemption scenarios where you have hundreds of tap leaves, and this is the tree, the script tree, and it's a binary tree, so it splits 1, 2, 4, possibilities. So by the time you get down to level 7, you have 128 tap leaves, and like I said, whichever one it is you use, if you're going the script path, you only need to reveal that. And instead of using things like if, where you have to write, op if, op not if, stuff you enclose in that, if you don't execute that branch of it, you still have to reveal it on chain back pre-Taproot. And that was inefficient, because if you wanted to create complicated redemption, if you wanted to create complicated scripts where redeeming the funds required complicated, a complicated mess, then you had to reveal all of the logic there, which used up a lot of space on chain. So that's why multisig would have a giant footprint. So Taproot would say, well, here's all the different ways you can redeem the multisig thing. And it can all, Schnorr means it can all condense down. And I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details with Schnorr there because we don't have full Schnorr. So you're not getting full cross-input signature aggregation. But there are other ways you can have the multisig redeem. Like if after this amount of time has passed since the UTXO was created, then fewer signatures are necessary, things like that. But you don't have to reveal the alternative scenarios is the point. You only reveal the one condition. So you don't reveal the various if scenarios. If this, then we can do that. If else this, then we can do that. If else this, then we can do that. Instead of revealing all that on chain when you go to spend it and showing that it was valid, the magic of Taproot is that you only reveal the part of it that was relevant. And that is the essence of scaling Bitcoin. That's why we were excited about Taproot. That's what it's here for. And you have to understand the reason BIP-110, even though it's about contiguous data and the main drama was about op return, because op return is straight up sanctioned file storage. Taproot was not sanctioned file storage. It became that because it got used in the most just bitterly ironic way. Taproot did the exact opposite of what scaling Bitcoin is. It provided a way for people to abuse Bitcoin and store data in it at a discount, meaning that we used the same amount of resources to achieve less financial activity because other stuff came in, started abusing the network, and made it so that we had to continue using the same amount of resources as we were before Taproot in order to process less financial stuff. You can weigh that up against advantages in things like Lightning and multisig and stuff and say, well, there were some benefits too. I'm not sure exactly how you would quantify it, but in any intuitive glance at the network, and you can see what happened with Taproot, you're looking at 40% of outputs are now trash. From 2023 onwards, the UTXO set more than doubled. This was horrendously bad. It made everything so much worse. People are routinely complaining, like, I sync in my new node, gets to 2023, boom. The whole thing ends up taking another 2 weeks after that, when it was, ticking along nicely until that point. There are other factors there, but the fact that something that was supposed to make Bitcoin leaner and help scale it had the exact opposite effect, in combination with another thing, SegWit, which came with the witness discount, which is also part of the abuse here. Those two combining means that two things we were excited about that was supposed to make Bitcoin a more efficient monetary vehicle blew up in our face and had the opposite effect. BIP-110 is the first thing I've seen that says, let's fix something that went wrong here. I haven't seen any other effort or any other humility from the developers that pushed these things, from the community that got behind them and bought in to the ideas of what they would bring to Bitcoin, ever say, all right, we've made a mistake, we've been going down the wrong path here. And this is why any other opcode these people want to talk about, great consensus cleanup or, the great script restoration, find me any pleb that has any time for these things or any confidence that they'll turn out like we're being promised. Because it's so unlikely. And not only do these things not go as we promise, but trying to fix them results in nothing but gaslighting about, apparently having violated some ideological constraint that none of us agreed to in the first place. None of us agreed that Bitcoin is uncensorable everything, permissionless everything. None of us agreed with that. It's supposed to be a permissionless monetary network, and the extent to which it can do other stuff it just undermines that. So I've said these kinds of points before, but I really just want to get into specifics with Taproot, because I don't think even many BIP-110 supporters have any clue about what specifically is going on here. These different spending conditions that you define within tap leaves, remember, the whole elegance of Taproot is that you only need to reveal the one you use. You don't need to reveal all of them. Thus, your monetary usage has a smaller on-chain footprint, so it's cheaper than it would be if you're using something cruder than Taproot. That was the elegant design of Taproot. What is op-if still doing as something you can add inside TapScripts? Because op-if means you're not using alternate leaves. It means you're putting everything on chain again, which is costing you more money pointlessly. Why would someone do such a thing? Let's leave it in Taproot anyway. Was the conversation even had to remove that within Taproot? No, I don't know. Maybe it was, but people thought, well, let's leave it in. Maybe someone could find a use for it. Turns out, what was the use for it? And this is not just a little bit of abuse. This was the inscriptions thing. This was all of the JPEG storage. How does an inscription work? Two transactions. You have a commitment transaction and you have the reveal. Because when you create a Taproot address, you don't know the rest of the world doesn't know what any of the spending conditions are within that. They just see a Taproot address. When you go to spend from that address, you have to reveal something. Usually you're going to spend using the key path. That's what authentic Taproot users do. And if you're doing some complicated extra stuff where you're redeeming via the script path, then you reveal the relevant leaf of the hash tree, of the script tree. So that being the case, you don't end up with a lot of op-ifs because they're pointless and inefficient and they don't belong in Taproot in the first place, even though they're consensus valid. But we ended up with tens of millions of UTXOs that had, or transactions rather, where the inputs were from a Taproot output, where they had piles and piles of op-false, op-if, a bit of JPEG data, op-false, op-if, a bit of JPEG data, op-false, op-if. Not contiguous, and I'll get into that later, because doesn't that conflict with the stated purpose of BIP-10, which is only supposed to target contiguous data? We'll touch on that in a minute. But looking at how Taproot is designed, why are there, I think it's 30 or 40% of it is all this kind of junk? Because these people intentionally want to use it inefficiently because they still get the advantage of the witness discount. And two, they need to reveal the data because they need it stored on other people's computers. And this is the perfect mechanism for them to do that. So this fabulous scaling technology, the way it ended up getting used, because 90% of Taproot outs are dust, right? Which means they are being used for data storage rather than actual monetary use. 90%. Okay, that's 90. That completely backfired. So disabling op-if in Taproot is basic housekeeping. It says that we do not have a legitimate use for this thing, even if there wasn't the inscriptions craze. So we look at the inscriptions craze and say, this is how op-if is being used in Taproot. It needs to be turned off immediately. It's not getting turned off outside of Taproot. It's only within TapScript that you can't use it. And then you have op success as well. BIP-110 disables that. Op success is not used by anything. It's there in a way where if it exists within your script anywhere, then that redemption is valid, and that's the end of it. Similar to how a pre-SegWit node will look at a SegWit spend and just say, yep, valid. And Craig Wright was trolled, used to like spread FUD about this because people fall for this kind of stuff. He said, anyone, if you send your funds to a SegWit address, anyone can spend it. He said that. That's true if you don't enforce the rules of SegWit, and it's the same kind of mechanism. That's why they're backward compatible soft forks, because the old nodes still accept everything that's happening on the new set of rules, because the new set of rules enforces extra conditions. So op success, I don't really fully understand it, but it's there as a way to make future upgrades within Taproot more elegant, and the obvious candidate for future constrictions that people might use to create more elegant scripts would be covenants, though very interestingly, the only real covenant proposal close to getting actually over the line and activated would be CTV. And because CTV is so old, it doesn't use Taproot, so op success being disabled in BIP-110 makes no difference. You can still activate CTV during the enforcement period of BIP-110 without having to wait for it to be over. So op success gets disabled because that can also be used to stash data. You just put chunks, loads and loads of data, and then you write op success somewhere, and then it all gets accepted. I don't know if the reveal works the same way. At this point, I'm out on my depth, but I'm going to stand by all the assertions I make in this video that BIP-110 is the perfect thing for this time, and these addendums and Taproot guardrails that have been put on are entirely appropriate and all just no-brainers, and the FUD against it, which most people don't come up with because I think most people just don't really understand this, is all frivolous obstructionism. The only people I see really doing it are Greg, and I saw Mononaut doing it a bit. They're saying there are legitimate UTXOs that are Taproot that have op-ifs inside them, and you can't know that as well, by the way, because, like I said, the commit transaction in an inscription, it's just a Taproot address. You don't know if there are op-if conditions inside that are necessarily going to be used. Remember what I said. For a start, most of the time people that are using using Bitcoin for monetary purposes are spending a Taproot output. They're using the key path, not the script path, which is where you start to get things like op-ifs anyway, if the wallet you used is designed in a really stupid way. But further to that, BIP-110 has a grandfathering mechanism. If your UTXO was created before it activates, then it's spendable even if it has op-if. There's another restriction, though, that I want to talk about, which is the depth of 7. If you're spending via the script path and you're going more than 7 layers deep in the tree of scripts, then the accompanying control block that goes along with the witness data required for you to be able to spend it would go above 256 bytes, and that's considered the limit in BIP-110 for the control block. That's why that's the biggest thing. You have 34 bytes as a limit for script pub keys. You have 83 bytes as a consensus limit for op return, and you have 256 bytes as a consensus limit for Taproot control blocks. And that means you can't go lower than 7 in the depth. So that means you have 128 leaves of the script tree, which may be a little bit limiting, and maybe there's someone that's created a UTXO now that would be rendered unspendable by those limits if we didn't have the grandfathering. But we have the grandfathering. And if by some chance you're using wallet software in a world where BIP-110 actually activates, and for some reason you don't update your wallet, or your wallet provider is negligent, and you create something that has this, as Dathan called it, pathological design, where you really are using Taproot in a very stupid way, you can create an unspendable UTXO that will remain unspendable until the end of that 12-month window. Then, I don't even want to give it, I hate giving these bad arguments so much credit, but I have to do it. Everyone immediately says, well, you'll just extend the 12-month period forever, and those people will have their UTXO locked forever. We don't have that kind of control. I don't have the control to make people run BIP-110 today, and I certainly don't have the power to start modifying the parameters in it and get everyone to just accept it. Things have changed about BIP-110. Bugs have been found and people have updated. But it's all just reasonable people doing reasonable things without any element of coercion. There are coercive elements to soft forks anyway. I've touched on those in other videos, but that's not relevant to this. The point I'm making here is that we do not have that kind of control. And I find what it does with Taproot, I just find that to be extremely rational. And it looks extreme, and it's being painted as extreme, and people are acting like we've crossed the Rubicon and that we're confiscating things and opening ourselves up to lawsuits, yada, yada, yada. I don't believe that at all. The network has the right to enforce what rules it wants. No one has the right to tell people what nodes they run. If people start running BIP-110 and enforcing a new set of rules that people can easily fit within if they're using Bitcoin as money, then that's fine. And here's the part I find really revealing. The two people that keep bringing up this nonsense about some convoluted inheritance scheme where you're creating pre-signed transactions that will manifest as UTXOs after the activation hype begins and thus create an unspendable UTXO. The fact that they're bringing that up is interesting to me because it's a tacit admission of the fact. What about all of the people doing inscriptions and all that stuff? We're going to make those people create unspendable UTXOs too, right? No one brings that up. Why not? Because they are just tacitly admitting that that is an attack on Bitcoin and not something anyone wishes to preserve. So it's a terrible argument. We are breaking the ability for people to make inscriptions the way they do with BIP-110. It's not an argument. So the only argument they bring up again is this convoluted inheritance scheme. That to me, I really appreciate the blip there because they're saying, all right, we understand the thing you're saying doesn't matter and is irrelevant to Bitcoin actually is. So we're not even going to use it as an argument. That to me is quite significant. They're not out here anymore saying inscriptions are valid transactions and you can't start making them invalid. That's a genuine use case for Bitcoin. They're not actually trying that stupid line with BIP-110. We know it's an attack. We know it's abusing people to try and to wrap their crap up as transactions and get their data stored on other people's computers, and just because those other people are trying to use Bitcoin as money. But they're not even trying that this time. They're going straight to, all right, we found genuine monetary use, so you have to back down. If there's one guy who made an inheritance scheme that has pre-signed transactions that have time locks as well, that would only manifest as UTXOs that show up after September 1st, 2026, that would then be rendered unspendable for 12 months as a result of your soft fork. Therefore, you must forget about it. Again, this is frivolous obstructionism. No one should be using Taproot that way anyway, and anyone sensible that isn't trying to place ridiculous ideological constraints on our actions in trying to defend Bitcoin, the monetary network, no one would be doing that if they were sincerely in agreement about the fact that Bitcoin is under attack and it has a right to defend itself, and its users are going to take the actions necessary. I can't discuss these things with people that don't agree we even have a problem. Most people do not agree that data storage in Bitcoin is a problem, especially that contiguous data is somehow distinct from non-contiguous data, and I said I'd come back to that, I still will. If I can't get them to agree on the problem, the only thing I can get them to agree on is that core kind of suck. And they refuse to acknowledge in what way they suck, because I'm saying the way they suck is having turned a blind eye to arbitrary data and lied about all the ways in which we might respond to that arbitrary data and defend ourselves, and recharacterizing it all as censorship and authoritarianism and all that stuff. This is very, very revealing to me that there's not a potential for common ground. Because if you don't agree that there's a problem, when I'm coming to you with a solution to that problem, any trade-off to you is just, well, you're making it worse. If there's one UTXO that gets created as a result of inertia, and BIP-110 makes it unspendable, then from their perspective, all we did was make Bitcoin slightly worse because we didn't fix anything. But the problem is BIP-110 fixes a whole load of stuff. First off, op return is obviously a ticking time bomb. And if we can turn that off, zero people think that makes Bitcoin worse somehow. So I'm very happy about that. Everyone should be happy about that. It was kept in check by filters before. Those had to be removed to appease Citria because Citria didn't trust doing what they need to do on a network that still embraced the node sovereignty at the mempool level. That had to be killed as a concept for Citria to be able to proceed. And it was. And the price of that was now we have uncapped op return. Pretty much. It's capped to 10% of its full capability, but that's still 100 kilobytes, which is a nightmare. Bringing that back in check, I don't think anyone has a problem with that. But the Taproot stuff is where it gets more complicated, because I just don't think most people understand that. They're really, like, when wallets come out here and say, hey, we use miniscript and we don't know how it's going to compile, so maybe there are op-ifs in there, and if you do this BIP, then maybe people will start generating UTXOs that are unspendable during the time of the BIP's enforcement. You can't do the BIP. No, my response is getting harsher and harsher. Just design your freaking wallet properly. It's not even worse. You're going to be using Taproot more efficiently, even if BIP-110 doesn't activate. Again, Nunchuck, I know you guys are strapped for dev cycles. I know you don't want to prepare for a BIP that you think won't activate. But at the end of the day, if it does activate, and your users start creating UTXOs that are unspendable as a result, that's going to be your negligence. You're not going to sit there and steadfastly open your users up to creating unspendable UTXOs because you disagreed with the BIP that actually activated on Bitcoin and now is Bitcoin. You're not suicidal. That would be insane for you to do. Then there was all the FUD around Liana. It doesn't generate op-ifs. It doesn't use op success. It doesn't go deeper than 7 layers of down the tree. So it's completely unaffected by BIP-110 because it's actually reasonably well designed, as it should be. The only people using op-if in Taproot are scammers because they need to reveal data on chain when the whole point of Taproot's design is that you obfuscate and hide it all so that you write less data to chain so that your on-chain footprint is cheaper. The whole point of Taproot is scaling, privacy, efficiency. people using it deliberately in the opposite way is why we have this anti-scaling technology that was sold to us as scaling that we refuse to fix because we're completely, utterly up our own arse with our ability to understand the results of our own actions. So BIP-110 putting guardrails on Taproot is justified, even though, again, and I'm going to touch on the contiguous data stuff now, we are saying that it's not an anti-spam fork in essence. The actual or instated objective, and you have to be very careful here. The reason that we feel a soft fork is justified at the moment is because of what happened with op return. That combines with the rationale of inscriptions exist and op return is better than inscriptions because it doesn't bloat the UTXO set and it doesn't get the witness discount advantage. Therefore, we're okay with it. That invoking the existence of the inscriptions hack makes it very justifiable to say, let's just fix Taproot at the same time. You don't need op-if. So combining those two things is reasonable, even though the Taproot hacking is not contiguous. But it feels a little bit, the alternative, like just targeting contiguous data, as BIP-110 purports to do, and states as its goal. If you neglect to address the Taproot hacking within that, in a way that, by the way, just makes Taproot way better, or forces people to use it the correct way, where they don't unnecessarily waste money. If you neglect to do that, it's not really going to be a credible change in trajectory with regard to how Bitcoin treats arbitrary data. The statement does need to be made, and they call it a virtue signal, but virtue signals mean a lot in this space. A statement of intent and your actions being congruent with it, even if they're not watertight, mean everything. And combining the two things is just utterly logical. And the only people that are against it are the scammers themselves that need to make use of these mechanisms, or people that just want to stand in the way and do nothing because they have ulterior motives. Because there is no way that Giacomo and Greg have some depth 8 script path redemption only, provably destroyed key path with op-if containing nonsense pre-signed transaction that would only generate a UTXO post September 1st that absolutely critically must be spent before September 1st, 2027. Like, the amount of things that need to combine, you need to be simultaneously an expert in Taproot to the point where you're the kind of guy that would create a script that complicated to store your precious Bitcoins, but also dumb enough to encumber it with a bunch of op-if conditions at the same time. Like, okay, so you can just go depth 8 without op-if and it would still be invalid. I shouldn't make that mistake. But the chances of anyone seriously using Taproot at that level of sophistication for serious amounts of funds, simultaneously not having the UTXO available now to spend, or having at least created it now so that it gets grandfathered in and remains spendable after activation, or just not paying attention to potential soft forks activating in Bitcoin, to me it's just, I have to say it's technically possible, but the reality of it is, if BIP-110 activates, you're not going to hear of a single person out there that's saying, wow, I generated a UTXO, and because of BIP-110 I now can't spend it, and this is all you guys' fault. You should never have done this. Why didn't you listen to Greg and Giacomo? That I just don't. It's obviously not a real scenario anyone is actually worried about, because no one with that level of intelligence is ignoring this. And context, by the way, Core 30 just deleted a bunch of people's wallets. Some people claimed it really did delete theirs. And everyone's saying, well, you should have had a backup. Backups, you make them, then you find out you really need that backup one day, and it turns out it wasn't working. It wasn't where you think it was. It was corrupted. These things happen. Did we just shrug the F off? Yeah, we did. Did we even fix it with any sort of professionalism? Nah. So stop holding us to these ridiculous standards when we're trying to make practical moves to try and reorient Bitcoin around the nodes and try and redefine it as a monetary network. Why do we have to meet all these impossible standards? The amount of people working on BIP-110 is obviously way smaller than the amount of people working on mainstream core, right? Can't do everything. Doing a really good job, being held to an insane amount of scrutiny and getting attacks from all angles. When it comes down to it, if you're prepared to look at it with a practical mindset, everything it does is totally reasonable. The guardrails it places on Taproot is, again, a humble admission of the fact that we screwed up with Taproot. We left it way too open because developers never want to deny themselves the ability to have a toy. And I try not to be so scathing in my criticism of them, but it really is just like having kids. Like, you've got 500 toys. I need to throw away one of them. No, you can't. That's my favorite toy. Look, man, I can't even open the door fully in this room because it's so full of toys. You don't need all these toys, okay? And you're not getting a whole bunch of new script codes, op codes to mess around in Bitcoin. Not anytime soon. No one trusts your ability to actually clean house and keep these things in check. Taproot has been running amok and creating nothing but problems for Bitcoin. And the benefits from it have barely begun to manifest. It's taken forever to get anywhere with that. And failure to clean up mess from previous upgrades is an abandoning of responsibility, and it needs to end. And BIP-110, I prefer the fact that it does this stuff, that it actually gets Taproot back in check, to anything else it does, because limiting op return at consensus, yeah, that needs to happen yesterday. And the longer we wait with that, the longer we're waiting for someone to dump a bunch of malicious data in the chain that makes it really just impossible for people to run nodes. By miracle, that hasn't happened yet, and I don't want to keep tempting it by going on about it, but it's very crude and easy fix. There's no reason for Bitcoin to have op return of that size. And limiting it is perfectly rational. Taproot, having all these holes in it, is more difficult to fix and more difficult to get people to rally around because it's just fundamentally much harder to understand. And I haven't been able to get anything out of the camp against BIP-110 that isn't philosophical whataboutism. Like, we cannot know for sure what miniscript does. Well, you can actually edit miniscript, I would say, fairly trivially if you put your mind to it, to ensure that it doesn't output if conditions in the addresses it generates for your customers. And if you can't be bothered to do that, then just implement a checker that if and when miniscript does cough out Taproot addresses that have that within them, it just says fail. That's all you need to do. Failed to generate address. Please try again. Wait a week for a software update. These are very niche products anyway. Things like Nunchuck and Liana, they're very niche. The wallets most Bitcoiners are using are Trezor, Sparrow, Electrum, things like that. They don't create these kinds of ridiculous scenarios. And if you're using these kinds of scenarios, you're not going to accidentally run foul of BIP-110 because you're well aware of the conversation that's going on here. You're at the bleeding edge of Bitcoin. And there's no way you haven't heard of the fact that 7% of the network are running software that aims to make invalid the UTXOs you're creating with your experimentation. The one thing that I don't understand the implications of, actually, let me be clear here. If I'm wrong in dismissing this stuff, I am the least technical out of the three like main people working on this thing, right? Luke, Dathan, and me. Dathan and Luke have dismissed the concerns around UTXOs being made unspendable. They just keep saying, look, man, I'm not even engaging with this. It's complete nonsense. Me, however, not having the knowledge they do, has to actually prove that for myself, and I can't expect them to sit here all day explaining it to me. So I've done my research independently, and I've come to the conclusion that, again, it is frivolous obstructionism. No one is actually using Taproot the way that BIP-110 targets, except the spammers. The spammers can do other things in other ways, but it makes sense to put the guardrails on Taproot anyway because they were specifically cited as rationale for blowing open op return. That is a very sound chunk of logic there, and I defy anyone to have a real problem with it. So, but here's the thing. I should be an easy dunk, right? Like, the people on the other side of this should be able to rip apart my logic here. If they really are the dream team developers, and they are sick of idiots on Twitter with no technical knowledge having opinions on stuff and running their stupid nodes, it should be pretty easy to take apart what I'm talking about here. If I'm really just an idiot and I don't understand what I'm talking about with Taproot, this is low-hanging fruit for you guys. You can come and debunk Mechanic. Mechanic knows nothing about what he's talking about. I'm going to explain why he's wrong. And then you can get a bunch of people not running BIP-110 nodes anymore. And then we can avoid all this drama, right? You get your way and there's less turbulence. The price stops falling. You know, why not? I invite people to come and criticize it and find holes in it, because until that happens, I'm going to assume I'm actually correct. I do not have anything like the cryptographic expertise to look at a thing like Taproot and Schnorr and actually figure all this out with a pen and paper. I can't do it. I have to sit here doing my research, finding out the info I can. AI is really helpful, thankfully, but it gets stuff wrong all the time. So again, it's an open invitation. Come and tell me I'm wrong about my conclusions here. But until you do, I'm going to assume that I'm actually correct and that no one is actually using Taproot for any of these esoteric purposes apart from the spammers themselves. And it was so unexpected that's why the things were not disabled within Taproot in the first place. So, I mean, OP success has a reason to be there, and that is another way they can store data. But the trade-off for disabling that is just it's so minor. We're not gonna. Is there a soft fork you need to get activated between September 1st, 26 and September 1st, 27? I don't think so. And if for some reason it's CTV, well, you can still do that because it doesn't use Taproot. So that's a happy coincidence. And I don't see any other soft fork getting activated within that 1 year stretch. So I just want to be clear on all that, because there's loads of people supporting BIP-110, and I don't know how they react when the mother brain of Bitcoin Core, Greg Maxwell, says, this confiscates UTXOs. It's a non-starter. It's unacceptable. He has said stuff to that effect, and I don't know how you can support BIP-110 if you haven't been through at least some degree of you haven't investigated to some extent. To me, it's not. I can't say that's completely untrue, because there are technically ways for people to put themselves in harm's way, given the context of BIP-110 now being a real threat from their perspective. But I can say it's ridiculously exaggerated and basically something that can be dismissed. The minute you have a benefit any kind at all with BIP-110, it becomes worth it because of how minimal the benefit is to leaving all this stuff. Any dev is going to lament the loss of any tool in the box, and maybe they can think of some use for op-if within Taproot. But I've been, back to what I said at the beginning of the video, I've been unfairly harsh against BIP-110 because I really do want to be able to present things neutrally. And for reasons I explained in my last video, I don't want to blindly support this thing and there ends up being something actually really bad with it. So I do want to invite criticism. But the criticism I get is just people being like, you're an idiot. You have a toaster oven with a hood vent above it. That's like a meme now. Like I do need genuine criticism. So I'm clutching at straws, finding the things people are criticizing about it and trying to get to the bottom of them myself to see if they're genuine or not. And then just inviting people to say, to remark on it, whether I'm being accurate or not. Because maybe there is some amazing use for op-if within Taproot, but I don't know what it is, and I don't think that's been demonstrated. The only thing I've seen from the wallet devs back is miniscript might create it sometimes, and we can't be bothered to make sure it doesn't. That is not a reason to keep a thing lying around when you can just redesign your wallet software. And then it's the choices with you, as I pointed out. Your customers are going to be unhappy if you don't. So sorry for the additional work. It would be worth it if you considered 40% of the UTXO set being complete garbage and doing something about it, you might be like, very worth it. I'll fix and make sure miniscript doesn't throw out op-ifs. Yeah, it might be worth it, guys. I bet you could stick miniscript in Claude one day and tell it, hey, ensure that this cannot possibly generate spending conditions or tap scripts that require op-if. Try doing that. See if it works out. I think it will probably do it for you in a day, and then you can have other people review it. If you're serious about actually analyzing the benefits from it, because again, if you don't agree that what we're doing is worthwhile, then you're just going to drag heels about everything. You know, we have to go to the store. I don't want to go to school. Therefore, I don't want to eat breakfast. I don't want to put my shoes on. I don't want to brush my hair. Yeah, because you don't want to go to school. I get it, but you have to do all these things, right? If you did want to go to school, like you're supposed to, like if you do want to actually do something about the pitiful state Bitcoin is in at the moment, then you're going to have to do a bit of housekeeping. Make sure miniscript doesn't throw out op-ifs. Make sure you're not accidentally generating beyond 128 leaves. Sort out a couple of things like that. Insulate yourself from the fallout of it. Your monetary users, no one is trying to antagonize you or create problems for you or put you in a box. You're not being placed under extreme restrictions here. You still have Taproot. You still have the benefit of the leaves, which means which are better than the op-ifs anyway. You can just you can tell everyone, look, your stuff is safe and we got rid of op-ifs, so now it's cheaper for you to redeem Taproot outputs on chain. So I encourage everyone to get familiar with this stuff, because this is really where the FUD lies. I mean, that is the one angle they have, is this confiscation FUD. BIP-110 is confiscatory, so it's a non-starter. A bunch of people said that on the BIP, like the day it was posted. It isn't, not in any meaningful sense. They are technically correct, and they are in every practical scenario completely wrong. So they can be dismissed. And until someone comes along and tells me that I'm wildly wrong here, or I'm just getting a very specific point wrong in this video, and if I was to correct it, I would come to a different conclusion. Wide open to that. DM me if you want. Make an anon account if you have to do it. I'm not trying to do this to do for political point scoring. I just want the debate to have as much honest information in it as possible. And as far as I can tell here, the FUD around confiscation is complete nonsense. It's not technically untrue, but it is nonsense. The same as spam filters centralize mining. They don't, because mining's, again, technically correct, because the playing field is not quite even, but manifestly irrelevant. And that would be exactly the same here. No one is actually going to create UTXOs that are encumbered with these kinds of conditions. The other thing they bring up is they just resort back to ideological stuff. This is censorship of people trying to use Bitcoin. It isn't, because we're not censoring people. We're censoring a way. We're not misspoke. Go ahead, clip it. If there's censorship, what you're doing is you're preventing a kind of use case. So you're not targeting a person. You're targeting a behavior, and you're preventing a kind of behavior regardless of who it is. So if you want to call that censorship, have at it, but it really isn't that. It's optimization, because you can still store data in Bitcoin if you want, but it's going to be made irritating for you and clunky. And that's an essential thing for a network to do to defend itself from abusive use cases. It has to happen. If Bitcoin can't defend itself like it needs to when it's obviously under attack, then it cannot survive greater attacks. It's not that this attack is not sufficient to motivate the immune system. We need to prove to ourselves that that Bitcoin is alive and will defend itself as necessary. It's not inert, as people like to pretend. You can't just treat it like an abusable resource that will never change or adapt to the environment it's in. Because if Bitcoin was like that, I wouldn't have high hopes in its survival. The BIP-110 response to the arbitrary data creep in Bitcoin, to me, is what makes me confident in it for the remainder of my lifetime. And if that were to drift away, then or I didn't see a sufficient response to it, I just wouldn't have the confidence in Bitcoin anymore. And there's just no, I cannot be more honest about it than that. If Bitcoin is incapable of adapting as necessary when it's placed in certain conditions, how could I maintain my confidence in it? How could anyone? And Simon Dixon's been doing videos lately, and he's trying to remain extremely zoomed out on it. And I really respect his perspective on it, because one thing he said, he's not coming out in favor of BIP-110 or anything. He did say he was running knots a while ago. But one thing he did say was that it doesn't, even if you have a small group of people write an alternative implementation, they don't, and even if that's essentially centralized at that point, you can consider not centralized if you want, but the people that choose to run it aren't. And that's the point. If Bitcoin is the consequence, or is the rule set as enforced by a large group of people, and we can't force that large group of people to behave in any way, then that is what makes Bitcoin resilient. That's why the hijacking Bitcoin narrative that Roger Ver threw out there is nonsense. It's a very valid dismissal of that. You can have centralized devs, but you cannot have centralized enforcement. That would be the end for Bitcoin, but it isn't centralized. The nodes genuinely are decentralized. And if they are choosing to run BIP-110, then that just becomes what Bitcoin is. And I stand by that. So I really do want to finish this video with saying I think this was just an incredibly clever idea, BIP-110. I think it does exactly what's needed at the moment. It takes what Core 30 said, and it resolutely says the opposite thing. It does so with reasonable constraints on itself. It's not crippling Bitcoin in any kind of way. It's not making multi-sig and things like that impossible. It's not making UTXOs unspendable. It is massively stating that people who've been running amok and blowing up the UTXO set are not going to be able to do it the way they've been doing it. They can move to another method, and they can expect hostile responses from the network in future. They're not going to get a bunch of, well, what about, why we can't do anything about this because isn't that censorship? They're not going to have an idiots community that falls for that this time. So they can try and adapt if they want, but they're going to run into a bunch of mempool filters, and they're going to run into a bunch of miners that don't really want to stir the pot after all this disruption. I think the network, the nodes, they're the people that can handle more disruption than anyone else. The industry that everyone looks to for guidance on this stuff is the most vulnerable to volatility. Giant mining pools hate price volatility. Plebs couldn't care less. They just stacked more sats this week from their paycheck. They will run this thing into the ground if they don't get their way. So it's incumbent on everyone against BIP-110 to tell them respectfully why it might not be a good idea if that's the case. You're not going to get anywhere constantly mocking people and talking down to them and telling them they don't understand. Because somehow intuitively, I would wager that a lot of people don't understand some of the ins and outs of Taproot. I definitely don't, and I'm out here championing it. Those people have intuitively come to the right conclusion anyway. And if you want to try the ideological gaslighting, either it's censorship or there's going to be unspendable UTXOs. If you want to try and do that, that's just a cheap tactic. It works in mainstream politics. I just don't think it works in Bitcoin. People are too prepared to actually do the research. So you better come up with something good against BIP-110. I'm expecting, like most nuclear move I can see is, maybe I shouldn't give the chess moves away, but I do see them coming up with something quite violent in the opposite direction, actually, because they're not really getting very far saying BIP-110 is stupid, don't run it, they're all idiots, and let's just ignore it. They're not doing very well with that, because we're approaching 8% now. It still isn't even mainstream knots. When it gets merged into knots, I would expect us to go north of 10% pretty quickly after that. A lot of the bugs have been found, like it's a necessary part of the process. Finding bugs knocks people's confidence. Then the bugs stop coming and we realize, well, actually, at least this thing's getting review and clearly people are paying attention to it. If no one ever found any bugs in BIP-110, that would probably just mean no one actually reviewed it. So that wouldn't have been great. The fact that it's been reviewed and bugs have been found shows you that actually some scrutiny it's come under some scrutiny and it's held its own. The fixes were put in, So all that is to say, what their response might be, I don't know. I don't think the tactic, at some point they're going to figure out that they're not being particularly effective by saying, I am Adam Back. I am mentioned in the white paper. Don't run BIP-110 because it's stupid. I think that that tactic is not going particularly well for them. So they have to come up with something better than ignore it because I'm Adam Back. That's not going great. Greg is going really hard on that. This confiscates people's coins. That is a plausible sounding reason. But again, I think over what I've gone over in this video, you should be able to, like I am, assert that that is just frivolous. No one is getting their coins confiscated by BIP-110. It's an edge case of an edge case. And the people that occupy that territory know very well what BIP-110 does. And again, like I thought, I thought that I've been more critical of BIP-110 than others because I want to be able to support it from an apparent position of having scrutinized it myself. So initially I said it killed BitVM. It doesn't kill BitVM. I was more worried about the FUD Greg threw out there about it messing up people's inheritance planning. It doesn't. According to the research I've done, it's not going to create any problems for anyone engaging in monetary use of Bitcoin. And you can find things to pick and moan at about it all you want. But if you were to be appeased entirely, BIP-110 would be removed of everything except potentially just, you can mission creep it out to the point where it's completely and utterly, defanged and declawed and just utterly toothless. You can make it do nothing if you want and make it a purely cultural fork, and then you end up just with people are running something that isn't run by core, and you end up back with the knots battle again, and that's not going anywhere, unfortunately. So, and I don't think that's even appropriate. I think everything BIP-110 does is very sensible, and it's being, again, labeled as extremist and rushed and full of, well, apparently Hodlernaut didn't say it had red flags. He was saying core had the red flags. So sorry about misrepresenting something Hodlernaut said in my other video. Yeah, we're not the extremists. We're not mental. We're just trying to forcibly grab the wheel and say, we are driving in the wrong direction. This is too important to mess up. This is very, what's the word? There is a lot of decisive action going on amongst people that are in favor of BIP-110, but they're not crazy. They've just done the assessment and they've said Bitcoin is going in a really bad direction, and it doesn't take long to see it doesn't take much to see where this ends up. We have to course correct now before it's death by 1,000 cuts. And I just find all of the decisions within BIP-110 to be really sensible. So, yeah, not necessarily, just find holes in it. If it really does turn out that there are people making all these pre-signed transactions, like Lightning uses pre-signed transactions, but they don't generate UTXOs that would become unspendable under BIP-110. That's a fact. Go use Claude and stick in the code bases. That's true for every Lightning implementation out there. So it's just devs saying, well, what about if I was to do this thing? Then I would generate a UTXO that BIP-110 would make unspendable. Therefore, it confiscates UTXOs. Therefore, it's completely a non-starter. This is bullshit. I'm not accepting that. You're just putting yourself in harm's way because you can't accept the reality of the fact that this BIP actually might activate. And the minute it does, Obviously, you're not going to design your wallet software or your inheritance planning or make some Lightning implementation that starts generating stupid Taproot addresses that rely on that stuff, because you just lock yourself out of your own money. No one working on deep Bitcoin tech like that can afford to be that ignorant. You can posture about it now while the BIP isn't that widely enforced, but if it is, you're just going to go along with it because you're not stupid. And if you really are like, hey, I found something, BIP-110 needs 129 leaves, or it needs op-if, it can actually use it and it's better than using a different leaf, then just talk to people about it. Say, hey, I found a way to make Bitcoin better money that is frustrated by the rules of BIP-110. Okay, well, we've only got 7 months left. Okay, start working on it now. And at the end of the 7 months, if the network is happy with how things have been going, we just create an exception for that because it makes Bitcoin better money. No one's going to be opposed to that. If you're coming up with uses for Lightning, or you have some BitVM thing that's genuinely a good scaling option for Bitcoin, none of the people in the monetary maxi side are going to be opposed to that. And if they are, well, of course they can be irrational, but like there's not a massive anti-CTV sentiment or anti-ARC or things like that within the monetary maxi side. There are definitely people opposed to CTV and things like that on my side of the aisle here, but I do think a lot of that is just because of what I mentioned before, the byproducts of SegWit and Taproot that we didn't anticipate that have anti-scaled Bitcoin. If we start addressing stuff like that, people regain their confidence in going back to actually trying to scale Bitcoin again with ingenious cryptography. So we can move this whole thing in a very, very positive direction quickly. I do again think it all comes down to humility and developers acknowledging what happened with SegWit and Taproot and finding practical ways to make things a lot better and to move in a good direction, rather than this masturbatory direction of, well, let's just focus on security budget for miners and open up Bitcoin to more use cases and just try and flood the chain with as much stuff as possible, and then we get all of the crypto market, right? We should bring the NFTs over here. This is all just complete idiocy, and it's been the main thinking of all these giant industry figures in the space for years now, and it's so stupid and so short-sighted. All it's done is completely dilute and corrupt Bitcoin at the developer level, at the conference level, within the chain itself. It's just been horrible to watch, and all that needs to be just done, right? And it strangely mirrors what has been. I'll refrain from making that comparison because that would just be sensible, but maybe you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, come at me if I'm wrong about Taproot. I promise you, I don't want to be convincing people that BIP-110 is a good idea if it's really going to start making problems for monetary users of Bitcoin. Then I'll promise you I'll renege on it. I will petition Luke and the others. Hey, can we just make it specifically op-false, op-if instead of just op-if? Because op-false, op-if is literally useless. It's literally pointless code unless you're trying to store data on chain. I'll push for that. If removing op-if is too crude, too reckless, I will push for BIP-110 to be modified as so. You have my word on that. But I need to see evidence there that is more than I can't be bothered to make sure miniscript isn't actually generating op-ifs, or lies that Liana generates them when it doesn't. I need something a bit more concrete than that, because so far these are the best arguments coming out of the anti-BIP-110 side. And a little bit of research shows you that it just doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem based on something anyone should care about. All right, I'm rambling. End of video. Thank you.